Good evening, everybody. It's so good to see so many faces joining us here. And not only that, is that we've got some excellent roundtable experts, as well as those with lived experience. And the topic today is talking about dyspraxia and autism. So it's understanding dyspraxia and autism. So we have different members of the panel here. We're just going to ask them to introduce themselves briefly. Those I can see on screen at the moment. We've got about 15 seconds for yourselves. So Andy, I can see you first. Would you like to say hello to everyone?
Hello to everyone. I'm Andy McDonald. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have an organisation that works mostly with neurodiverse communities called Studio 3, and I'm an old friend and colleague of Raj. So I'm quite happy to answer, although some of the questions tonight do look slightly more difficult than they would at first appear. So we'll see how we go tonight, really.
Thank you. And Fazilla.
Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Fazilla Jimaboy. I'm the founder of Relaunch Collective, which is an organisation that combines coaching and consultancy to support inclusive workplaces and practices being embedded in organisations. I am a clinician by background, and I'm here today both as an expert in some parts, but also with somebody that has lived experience living with dyspraxia.
Thank you. And Georgia?
Hi everyone, my name's Georgia. I'm autistic and I work in clinical coding at Regent Point in Gosforth. And I know Sensei Raj from doing jiu-jitsu, which is a big part of my life being autistic. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Sean?
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Sean Riley. I'm a chartered occupational and coaching psychologist, and I work in the area of neurodiversity in the working environment. So I work with a variety of organisations to raise awareness, to carry out diagnostic assessments in dyslexia, dyspraxia and dyscalculia, as well as screenings for autism and ADHD. But most importantly, I'm massively interested in the interventions that come after the diagnosis and the support that we can put in place for people. Most prominently is dyspraxia in adults, because there seems to be quite a lack of research and literature in that area, mostly aimed around children. So I'm very interested in filling that gap and doing more research in that area. And I've known Raj. I think we bumped into each other at a networking meeting, and I haven't been able to shake him off since, to be honest.
Thank you. And Vijay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vijay. I'm a ADHD neurodiverse character artist, workshop facilitator, and now I'm doing some public speaking. And I'm advocating for hidden disabilities, intersectionality, neurodiversity, suicide prevention, many things. I want to share my lived experience because I would like certain things to become common knowledge and just share strategies, tools, things I've been using. If others find it helpful, then that's the main thing for me. So thank you, Raj.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vijay. I think someone else was going to be on the panel, but for some reason they've not been able to join us today. So just to help with the smooth running, if you could keep your microphones on mute, just in case we have an interference or background noise. So those who don't already know me, my name is Raj Soran, a mindset coach, author, and martial artist, and I run a business called Black Belt Mindset. And that is all about helping individuals and organizations grow their businesses, as well as grow their personal development skills in terms of reducing stress, improving well-being, and improving performance. So we're going to kick off with one of the questions that are listed here that we're going to go through. I may not get a chance to go through all of them. First one being, what are the key differences and overlaps between dyspraxia and autism in terms of diagnosis and daily challenges? So I'm probably going to address this to both Andy and Sean, who'd like to kick off.
I really don't mind kicking off. I think I could probably look at the overlaps there. So dyspraxia, it primarily affects motor coordination, and well, so that could be gross and fine motor coordination, and impacts planning as well. With regards to the similarities with autism, There can be challenges in both with regards to motor difficulties, so with the fine and gross motor skills, coordination and balance, and difficulties with movement. There's also the sensory processing as well, which is prevalent in both areas. So that can be, heightened sensitivity or lower sensitivity to stimuli such as sounds, lights, textures, and that can obviously can imagine that this can significantly impact the daily lives of individuals. Also, I would say, and Andy, please dive in, if there's anything that I'm stepping on your toes with regards to this one, I would say that there is certain impact and crossover with executive functioning as well. So with regards to the planning, organization, task completion, and all of those sort of things. So these type of things, it's like with daily routines, like with getting ready in the morning, getting dressed, and really some of the things that I would say neurotypical individuals might take for granted, that it doesn't take too long. With both dyspraxia and autism, that can be significant challenges as well. And I think the last one that I would add, and again, this is something that really does, I would say, attract me to the foundations, is the impact that it can have on self-esteem and also mental health as well with individuals. Because, we do have to consider that these are neurodevelopmental conditions that begin in childhood. And they're sometimes diagnosed early and interventions are put into place, but often they are missed because individuals either mask or the facilities aren't there to actually make us aware that an individual might be neurodiverse in these areas. So therefore, that self-esteem and the issues, whether that's through bullying, or any other challenges that we have, not being included in groups, not being drawn into environments because of ability, and like with dyspraxia or autism, being slightly different from others and being excluded, that significantly impacts people as they go through their life. So, there's quite a lot to unpack. If we have certainly later diagnosis, it can be quite significant and lots of things to unpack there. So, Andy, I don't know if you've got anything else that you would like to add to that.
I think that's a really good introduction, Sean. I mean, the only things I would add from my own background as well is I'm what they call a pracademic. So I spend most of my time in the real world, a tiny bit in academia, just to keep me busy. There's neurodiversity in my friends, family relations. I changed as a psychologist, so people understand my views, probably in my 20s, many years ago. I started out as a fixer, one of these behaviorists who is out there, well-intentioned, wanting to change the world, and sometimes designed interventions that were helpful, and sometimes they weren't helpful in the early days. Well, I've moved into looking at this area a lot more, and a number of related areas. We've got everything from dyslexia. You said dyscalculia. There are such a range of, sometimes I'll use the word conditions, and I mean that respectfully, that overlap so massively because, quite frankly, to your audience, our diagnostic system is really poor. It's at the very early stages. And what's happening is that within diagnosis, to give you an example, and I'll relate it to autism and dyspraxia, if you look at the different classification systems and you're somebody with lived experience or other expertise, and lived experience is the thing I've learned the most from over the years, I'll be honest, rather than the textbooks, is that you could look at things like in the International Classification of Diseases or the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manuals. They're like the Bible for diagnosis. And I give people an exercise every time to do when I do this seriously. And this is usually for psychologists, because I want them to have a little bit more empathy and humility sometimes about diagnosis and what comes after it. And all I'll ask them to do is to have 3 pens, red, amber, and green. And they have to circle 10 of these labels that they'll see in the list that they think exist. Red is definitely doesn't exist, another 10, and not sure for 10. And the reason why I only give them 30 is because it lasts too long when people look at classification. And these are even people with psychology and psychiatry backgrounds. So it's one of the things I want to plead to people is there are conditions that are, quote, pure. I've seen someone who is dyspraxic with no other related issues at all. I've seen people with autism who have no dyspraxia, but there is a huge overlapping mess between ADHD, PDA, a whole range of labels that have become, in science terms, we call it reified. They become they've been given thinghood whether they exist or not. The example is somebody believes there's 20 subcategories of depression. Good luck to you. You can't even get kind of a consistency about it. And the key thing for me that's changed a lot in my work over the years, and I originally started working with people with disabilities of all kinds, learning disabilities I started with, then autism, then a whole range of other conditions, children and adults. Was one of the things that I started to notice over the years was there was a very strong human rights movement that was emerging, originally in disabilities first in the 60s and 70s, and then more recently in the neurodiverse community, as I would call them, which, like any other campaigning group, is really partly a human rights-based group about people being acknowledged and respected for who they are. There's a very famous person with autism, Jim Sinclair, who was one of the early thinkers in this entire field. And Jim had this phrase, "I'm not a broken version of you. I don't need be fixed and repaired. I need you to understand me. I need to try and understand you and understand that our worlds are kind of mutually alien to each other at times." I read that man's first book in the early 90s and it just totally destroyed my career. I was going to be this professional with a tweed jacket, sitting in my office, which I don't do that much anyway. And it really focused me on this. And for tonight, Sean's summary there, I think, around dyspraxia is true. The only thing I would add to it in a non-long-winded way, I can see Raj looking at me now saying, "Come on, hurry up, Andy," is the fact that most of the research, if you want to call it that, done in this field, even with lived experience research, tends to focus much more on children. Lived experience research tends to focus more on adults. And I would encourage people to understand that actually even what we know at the moment is growing daily and weekly. So I'll stop there, but that'll be, I would concur with what you're saying there, Sean, definitely.
Thank you, Andy and Sean. The other panel members, is there anything to add to that? Please do so now. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next question in terms of those with lived experience. So what has been your biggest challenge in navigating life with dyspraxia and or autism? And either Georgia can go first or one of the others, but I think Georgia's got a microphone open now. So if you want to go first, Georgia.
So I think what I would say my biggest challenge in navigating life with autism would be is seeing the world in a very black and white point of view. Like I don't always see the variations or subtleties, and I can't read the room or notice subtext. So a very good example of this was from when I was in school, and we had a science experiment where it involved worms for some reason, and the last question was the experiment fair? And I was the only one who said that it wasn't fair because the worms got sick, and the teacher didn't understand where I was coming from with this point, and he was just very confused and puzzled by it all. So I think that would be the biggest challenge that I face in daily life. So I have improved over the years, but I think there will always be times that I will still see it like no grey areas and sometimes still just black and white. So
Thank you, Georgia. So Priscilla and VJ, so what's your take on this?
I would say my biggest challenge only transpired in the last few years when I became a mother. I alongside dyspraxia also have dyslexia, and as I learned more about my own way of living and my own brain, I learned that pre-having a child, I was incredibly high functioning. And so a lot of what I was doing was automatically masked. Just for context, I got diagnosed with both at the same time on going for a dyslexia screen when I was in my final year at university. So quite late diagnosis, very much an adult at the time. And I was also diagnosed with dyspraxia at the same time, and which came as a bit of a surprise. And at the time, I didn't know much about dyspraxia, so I had to do a lot of learning. I was not given very many tools. So firstly, there was a challenge of understanding the diagnosis and what that means and what it meant for me. And in all honesty, it meant very little initially. I had a child and I felt that everything felt so much more cumbersome. All the masking that I now know I was doing previously actually was revealed. And so a lot of my innate strategies that I'd put into place were no longer working because routine and predictability, which my life very much was like prior to having a child, no longer really existed. And so my brain had to work in a new way. And actually, that's where I realized the real challenge lay, was when I had essentially the biggest responsibility of my life shift into a different energy and a different channel.
Thank you, Priscilla. So obviously quite a big change in your life, brought about some new strategies. VJ.
Well, I can relate to a lot of what Priscilla and George have said. For me, the biggest challenge has been cultural. Being British Indian, I find that there's beautiful things about my culture, but there's also a lot of stigmas and sort of interpersonal attitudes that are lacking in terms of acceptance and understanding, and language barriers, actually. I also have masked a lot, but the language barriers, there aren't really. I am also dyspraxic, dyslexic, ADHD, autistic. I've got a long list of diagnoses, but there aren't many labels in Gujarati, is the language I speak, for autism, and like the sub labels like monotropic split or etc. You know, there aren't really any Gujarati words. You have to kind of add a bunch of different words to then be able to relay it, you know, to family members or people in the community. So I think that's got been the biggest challenge. But also along with that, it's been quite difficult to get diagnosed as well. I'm late diagnosed. Only December last year, been diagnosed with autism. The conventional medical system, you know, there's limited support for adults. So I had to go to specialist and private professionals to be diagnosed. So I've been cheeky and giving you two answers there, but the cultural one I'll put at the top.
Thank you, Vijay. Yes, the cultural one is a very important one, probably worth a whole different webinar on that as well, talking around that particular topic. So we're going to come back to that section of the panel in just a moment. So the next question is, how can early intervention help individuals with dyspraxia and autism, and what are the most effective support strategies? So I'm going to throw that out to the panel. Either Andy and Sean could maybe kick that off again.
I think I might put my cards on the table here. Early intervention is important, but it can also be overdone. And I'm talking about from everything from early intervention programs in things such as ABA, applied behavior analysis. One of the issues around neurodevelopmental conditions, and this is my own view and my colleagues' view, but not everyone shares it, is that actually when we're looking at individuals who are struggling to make sense of the world, particularly in their teens and earlier, it's important that people have understanding and acceptance rather than interventions per se. And I wouldn't have said that 25 years ago. I'd have been one of the interventionists. And the reason for it is that people developmentally move at different rates. I mean, as VJ, well, you all pointed out quite nicely, that the stigma that often parents face when their child are labelled with these labels is enormous still in our society that's accepting. I promised myself tonight I wouldn't mention Mr. Kennedy in the States, who is now trying to unravel and demystify with his idiosyncratic views of autism, which are not even worth comment tonight. They are rubbish. And I think one of the things about this is that early intervention for me means about nurturing, it means about support. Actually, there are, with particularly dyspraxia, there are motor programs, there are things that can be do. One of my own sons, who's dyslexic and dyspraxic, he ended up with a first in engineering. I always mention that, he'll be horrified of it. I'll even mention him tonight. But his motor coordination was absolutely lousy. And when he was about 10, we did start to encourage him to do things to do with balance. I remember once even being accused when we heard this almighty smash outside of our house as his skateboard had careered into our garage doors. And what we said was, there is some evidence for encouraging coordination, but not to go over the top with it. So for me, when we say early intervention, I would say it's much more about early understanding. of these conditions, and actually people are trying to overcome the stigma. I'm not necessarily as well into the idea that everyone's got a superpower. That's something that the neurodiverse community says. For some people, having these labels themselves can be really confusing and awful for them. But actually, most people have specific abilities. I have one nugget for tonight, which is a recent review article done in something called Frontiers in Psychology, which has looked at dyslexia. And actually, some of the more recent cognitive research on dyslexia is fascinating because it is showing differences around focus that are actually would be supranormal skills if you had the other set to go with it. The same with people on the spectrum, attention to detail. Black and white thinking, as George has described it, is actually something that's really helpful in a lot of areas. So one of the things that we're looking at here is actually saying early intervention's okay up to a point, but I'm going to say categorically, American research, which has swamped this area for 30 years, has almost given the impression to parents that you're on the clock and you need to start early with lots and lots of programs. You need to start early with love, acceptance, understanding, and try and pace the fact that somebody's learning to regulate their life. And that's going to take time. So that would be, I know that'd be different from what some professionals would say, but Sean, I don't know what you'd say about that at all, actually, or anyone else.
Yeah, I think Sean, yeah, and I think Phil is about to say something, but Sean, fire away.
Yeah, to be honest, Andy, I don't want to just support you for the sake of it, but I am going to support you anyway because I totally agree with what you've mentioned.
Okay.
I do, and I think it just, takes us back to what I said in the first place when we talked about self-esteem, about the impact of challenges of being different from a very early age, and Andy, I totally agree. If that is can be alleviated through love, support, compassion, and acceptance, and also, dare I say, when we get into the adult realm as well, I'm finding that solution-based approaches are probably the best way to look. So we're focusing on the strengths of an individual. We're also looking at acceptance and commitment and being able to move on. So what we're not trying to do is let's talk about your challenges again, because we've done that. It's been time after time we've talked about these challenges. So let's talk about what you contribute to the working environment or the environment, the team that you're in. And Georgia, I totally agree with what Andy says there. I have a military background, black and white thinking, bring it on. When you're in that ops room, you absolutely need, sometimes, and you need that mix of character. That's what I'm saying. And we say the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. If you can remember that rhyme, it's probably before your time there. But certainly, we need different ways of thinking, because if we're all thinking in the same neurotypical, if you like, the norm, the bell curve and everything like that, then we wouldn't get the best possible result. Sometimes we need to have it exactly how it is. And that's why black and white thinking and encouraging that is great. So going back to the question, for me, it's the same as Andy there. We're looking at self-esteem, compassion and love and care from an early stage, so that we can allow people to develop to be the fantastic human being that they're going to be and that they're destined to be.
Thank you, Sean.
End of my story.
Brilliant. Thank you. Priscilla.
And actually, just to add to that, and I'm, again, not just saying this for the sake of saying it, but actually we have to remember that emotional regulation doesn't fully form until you are about mid-20s, give or take. And I think when you are also sort of thinking about early diagnostics and creating an environment so that they can thrive in a neurotypical world, actually, I would like to challenge that and say, surely we should be creating an inclusive environment for everyone to thrive, rather than having people from neurodiverse that have neurodivergence to conform to neurotypical brains and ways of working. And so for me, I think that very much like what's been said already by Andy and Sean, that actually the support needs to be holistic and sustained. So labels can be great for some people, and some people really reckon with that. But what we know of labels so far, and from what history tells us of labels, is that actually it can be quite damaging, very much to what Andy was saying. And this is where I think intersectionality comes really into play here. And when we think about labels not just of neurodivergent people, but what Vijay was sharing around how his ethnicity has also compounded on his struggles with his neurodivergence. I think that we have to just be mindful of labels at an early age, especially when we are our brains aren't fully formed in terms of regulation. I also think there has to be a shift in the way we talk about managing diagnostics and managing transitions. So often younger people struggle with that are neurodivergent often struggle with transitions, whether that's transition from primary school to secondary school, or transition from moving to environments, or transitions in their personal life. I think that these particular areas need focus and holistic care, but it takes an approach from the family unit and also from those outside the family unit for those young people. And I think that this is what I see as early intervention, a holistic approach that isn't just the responsibility of parents, but also of society in wider, so schools and the education system, government, local authority, and building into that multidisciplinary support in a way that isn't ostracizing to individuals.
Thank you, Priscilla. I'm sure we can talk more on that particular question itself. I'm going to move on, and there are some good comments in the chat as well. If you want to have a look at that. There's people with lived experience also going through similar sort of history. In terms of lived experience, can you share any strategies or tools that have helped you manage your daily life, school or work? Who'd like to share first?
Happy to go.
Vijay?
So in terms of helping myself with strategies and tools, I have like a holistic management strategy, which I deploy daily. I signpost myself to professionals, and I have a supportive network. So in terms of daily management strategies, I use praying, breathing, vagal hacks, somatics, movement. There's a whole sort of holistic angle that I take to help myself, because like some of you've said, the overlaps between dyspraxia and autism is quite about the movement. So I deploy those daily strategies, but I also seek professional help. I think that's very important. So I've sought privately various professionals, professors, physio team, because I think hypermobility as well kind of comes into the equation, as well as CPTSD, so traumatologists. It's just examples of some people I see. But in terms of the supportive network as well, I think, I don't know if anyone else can agree with this, but I've been around quite a few toxic sort of people. So I find being around tonic people with a growth mindset quite helpful. And recently talking to you, Raj, as well, talking about safety plans in moments of crisis. So there's quite a few different things I'm mentioning there that I've picked up along the way. As I mentioned, I'm late diagnosed, so I've had to kind of figure it out myself, so to speak. But a lot of the things have also came from professionals. So hopefully that's helpful to everyone.
Thank you, Vijay. I think Georgia was about to say something as well.
So what the strategies that have helped me navigate my life have been requests for reasonable adjustments where appropriate, such as taking my GCSEs and A levels. I got to sit my exams in a separate room, and mentioning my poor eye contact in the other notes for when I get interviews for work, so because I know that eye contact's very important generally when the interviewees are being interviewed. And through doing jiu-jitsu, what has helped with that is doing in-house gradings or having a designated training partner for and listening to music and watching TV and reading books and hanging out with my friends, because I've joined some other hobbies. I've joined this Vikings group and a drama group too, and and I've been hanging out with some colleagues outside of work as well. So
Thank you, Georgia. Anyone else want to add to that in terms of Zilla?
So for it's quite difficult to disentangle the dyslexia and dyspraxia, because, as we've already discussed, there is a level of overlap between all the variety of conditions, if we're calling them conditions today. In terms of what helps me, so there's like day-to-day organization. I really find color-coded calendars helpful. I use visual planners, and I like to plan in advance so I know what's happening. If my routine is off schedule and something can't quite go to plan, I try to have a contingency plan. So discussing that with my support network is really important, especially when it comes to childcare, for instance, and contingency plans for looking after my daughter. In terms of other areas that I struggle with, I really struggle with excessive background noise. So noise cancelling earphones really helps me. But also, so simple things. So when I'm cooking, for instance, I need to have all my ingredients out, ready to hand, to cook with. I need to have everything measured out in the quantities that are needed for a recipe. I didn't know I needed this. So when I was cooking in the way my partner cooks, I found it really chaotic and got incredibly overwhelmed and flustered. But actually it was because actually my brain needed to be organized and know where my ingredients were, what quantities I was putting in. And that's just a really practical thing that I didn't realize, and I was beating myself up about, wondering why I can't just go to the cupboard and pick the ingredient out when I need to put it into the recipe, or into the pot. And having the extractor fan on, a really simple thing, but having the extractor fan on only for when it's really needed. Because again, when that extractor fan goes off, oh, my brain feels so clear all of a sudden. And I'm seeing a few smiles just from the panel, so I'm not sure if there's a level of understanding there. Also, I'm actually quite an extroverted individual, so I get a lot of energy from meeting people. But what I have realized is after a period of socialization, I do need my own time to just recuperate, reflect, and just rest. So I give myself that now. Having noticed my patterns of what's really been helpful is having a coach to help me with my self-development. But in the process of that, it has allowed me to become more self-aware of my emotions and when I'm feeling certain feelings and why then I'm feeling certain feelings, and looking back at my patterns. And then that's how I've been able to put in these thoughts. I had no idea about the extractor fan, and I didn't know why it used to annoy me, and it used to, I don't have a problem with cooking. I always thought I had a problem with cooking. Actually, it was the extractor fan and not having the ingredients out. So I guess for me, the biggest thing is actually taking a step back and looking at why I'm feeling certain ways, picking up on my feelings, and just being really self-aware of that. And like Vijay was saying, getting professional support. So I'm a firm believer in the power of coaching and solution-focused work. And so I've engaged in coaching for the past sort of 5+ years, pretty much consistently. And it has been so transformative to the way that I am in life now.
Thank you, Vizula. I think you can create your own cooking book and methods now using that. I was just going to sort of reach out to Ariane, who's on the call, as a dentist and specializes in teeth grinding as well. And I know that he wanted to say something and share his sort of ways of dealing with things. I think he has a background in ADHD as well, but there is some overlap with autism as well. Ariane.
Hi everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Raj. So yeah, I was also a late diagnosed person with ADHD, and then I found out, this whole dyslexia thing also comes with it. I didn't think anything much of it or anything, so I was kind of getting along with my life, with a lot of struggle and a lot of, let's say, weird adaptation methods to get stuff done. And I didn't really know there was a thing or something I was doing. So anyway, so I've tried a million things. So these two things that I said here, L-theanine and Panax ginseng, that's one of the list. You should see my cupboard downstairs. I have every Chinese, Indian, all the herbal stuff. Anyway, so I realized through doing a course, I was trying to educate myself that, all of us who have this issue of disbalance or misregulation of our nervous system, let's say, we've all had an event or had some events in our life which have resulted in the activation of our system. So for some of us, too long. It's like your nervous system gets too activated and it gets stuck getting activated. And for some reason, your neurotransmitters or the stuff floating in your system now doesn't release when it needs to release. So you're in a disbalance. So since discovering this, I realized that people who grind their teeth also have this sort of backbone as well. They're overactivated basically, and they don't know how to regulate the nervous system. So basically, that's kind of my experience with dealing with myself, my teeth grinding, and now I'm trying to help people stop grinding their teeth. But that's me, because we all have this overactive mind, right? That's basically what this is, because you're super activated. You have to find some way to entertain it. So for me, this has been my sort of side release. So when I'm going on an evening walk, that's kind of what I'm just thinking about it.
Thanks, Ariane, for chipping in there. Vijay, got your hands up.
No.
Just wanted to say I'm a teeth grinder, and I found out it's due to stress, and I've been given jaw exercises by the dentist. No, sorry, I can't remember which department it was actually, but I can agree, having CPTSD as well, that it is from an overactive nervous system, because there's on the diagnosis says autistic neurology. There's a lot of like these dyspraxia and autism are neurodevelopmental issues as well, aren't they? So there's a lot of this talk around neurology and nervous system. So just wanted to throw that in there from lived experience. Thank you.
That's really cool, Vijay. I would love to speak to you about it. I'm just trying to talk to as many people who grind their teeth, basically. So I would love to just have a talk with you.
I'll get an introduction sorted out. Andy.
Thanks, Raj.
Yeah, really nice to hear that as well, Ariane. What I was going to say is that when people talk about what can we do about this, I mean, there's two things I do want to add from this. One is that the sensory issues that were originally reported in autism only go back to the 1990s. People will talk about, oh, we knew about these things. No, we didn't, categorically. And actually, we used to think about one or two sensory things like sound sensitivity, difficulties in tuning out from background noise. But actually, if you've got an issue in one sensory modality, you've probably got a load of others. One of the reasons why I'm saying this is one of the most inconvenient things that we can do to help people to momentarily relax is look at their sense of smell. Nearly everyone can figure out smells. They can be unusual, from gasoline to lavender, that will actually have a calming effect on them. It's only temporary, but it can be huge when people have got profound anxiety. And the other one is my work is around what we call arousal regulation. And what you're talking about in terms of an overactive arousal system is common to nearly every condition, regardless of traumas. Traumas makes it worse. But one of the things we know is it's like having the lights permanently switched on a lot of the time. And somebody's used the word masking. What happens with that is people misinterpret that. I work with somebody at the moment who I've actually got him to monitor his heart rate, because for some people your heart rate is quite reactive and for others it isn't. In this person's case, he's not very aware. Only about 20% of people are aware of their own heartbeat. Believe that figure. And that's in the neurodiverse populations as well. So when his heart was overacting, he had to be taught to put his hand on his chest to check, very simply. Now he's got a watch, and it's actually true. Giving him techniques, breathing techniques and others that will help lower that temporarily is part of it. The other end of the scale, and it's just something I'm passionate about, is that also when we're talking about neurotransmitters like dopamine, the other thing I would say to you, Ariane, is that we're missing out an entire system that we're going to talk about a lot in the next 30 years, which is actually not neurotransmitters at all. It's the hormonal system in the body. We are discovering new hormones by the year. Some of them still don't even have labels. We haven't discovered any new neurotransmitters forever. And the reason for it is that brain chemistry and in the body interacts with our hormonal system. And the one hormone for everyone to look at in much detail is the hormone cortisol, which is often secreted when we're highly stressed. Now, not everyone does that, but actually most of the people I look at have high levels of cortisol. They're highly reactive. They can't even sleep at night half the time when their brains are overactive. The one thing that does help reduce cortisol is not even a tablet or even mindfulness, it's burst cardiac exercise. I didn't mention to people, I used to teach martial art jiu-jitsu years ago, and I used to notice how burst cardiac exercise had such a strong effect on a lot of the people that I might have necessarily labeled as a psychologist on a martial arts mat as being dyslexic, quite a few conditions. So for me, we're understanding a bit more about arousal regulation. And I think it ties into the point made by Fazila as well, which is that to regulate people, they require regulated people around them. And this is particularly true in schools. So it's actually co-regulation is the most important thing of all, that actually you need to move at people's pace. And I think the sensory issues around grinding teeth, huge number. I've even heard people come up with statements around nail biting, which is old as time. It's all anxiety. For some it is. For others, it's actually a form of self-mutilation. For others, it's just a habit. So to me, we're learning all the time with this, but these sensory issues, and sometimes we call them accommodations if we're really fancy that, but strategies that people develop are all good stress management strategies in general for the non-neurodiverse population as well. It's recognizing when you're out of kilter and what to do about them. It's all about that co-regulation. But the first one is to recognize when you're stressed. And one of the things I would encourage people to do is whether they do mindfulness or whatever relaxation methods, or whether they need to have lots of loud noises on, check your heart rate out by putting your hand on your chest sometimes and just ask yourself, does that feel normal to me? Quite a lot of the people that I support and work with can't recognize that, right? They don't even until it becomes overwhelming and they become overwhelmed. But I really have learned a lot from just these comments. Every time I listen to people with lived experience, I learn more. Yeah. And it just kind of, to me, it's about understanding that this is such a limited area of science. Please, people understand in this world of Twitter and nonsense that there is so many things that are looked at. I'll give you an example. There are over 1,800 recorded interventions for autism. The very variable effectiveness. Okay, 1,800, from swimming with dolphins down to early intervention and behavioural techniques. What it tells us is we still don't know enough about interventions and coping strategies. So to me, I just want to say, Raj, I'll shut up now. I just think it's really important that people understand that we all get stressed. It's our coping strategies that are the most important. They might be your fidgets, they might be the things that people have for accommodations, but they're the most important things, not the stress itself.
Thanks, Andy. I think they're in short supply of dolphins in the retail shops at the moment.
Well, I don't know. Look, I do know one person it worked for, but it's a rather expensive intervention. Similarly with guide dogs for people, I have no issue with guide dogs. The fact that they cost a lot to train. If somebody likes the smell of a dog, just get a dog, preferably not a traumatized one, to be around the neurodivergent every time.
Thank you.
It's cheaper.
We're going to move on. Thank you. Another question is, what misconceptions do people often have about dyspraxia and autism, and how can we challenge these stereotypes? Who'd like to chip in who's not said anything recently? So the different stereotypes. So for those with lived experience, is that something you come across in terms of people stereotyping in terms of dyspraxia and autism? Who'd like to share on that one?
I guess I can share a little snippet around dyspraxia. So I remember when I first found out I had dyspraxia, I mentioned it to a few friends of mine. No one had really heard about it. And then the one person that had was like, oh yeah, that's just clumsiness though, isn't it? And it's interesting because there have been times that I thought I've been growing up and I thought, oh, I'm just a bit clumsy, it's fine. And actually, no, it's an actual thing. It exists. It needs to be taken seriously. There are things that can help. And it isn't just about motor coordination, as we've already discussed today. But I guess that's been the biggest, maybe not misconception, but definitely language that's been used around dyspraxia. And since then, as dyspraxia is becoming more known, the term clumsiness I'm hearing more and more of. Oh, you're just medically diagnosed as clumsy then. And it's said in jest. It's not necessarily meant harmfully, but in the wrong ears or in the wrong frame of mind of an individual, I think language really does matter.
Thank you, Fazila. I think
I have
language does definitely matter, and people, if they see black and white, and then that can be, have an impact on their emotional well-being as well. Anyone else want to add to that before we go to the next question?
Yeah, I don't mind adding something to that. I don't know, Andy, if you've come across the work of Dr. Luke Bearden, a book that he wrote. Yeah, so autistic, what works for autistic adults, and I've just actually looked it up to make sure I got the title right on that one. And he actually has a list of what not to say to someone who is autistic, which is I think it's sort of tongue in cheek, but it is so true. Like where people may say, you seem fine to me, you might have grown out of it. Or things such as, are you sure that you're not just being a little bit too sensitive? Or, but you're so clever, but you're nothing like anyone else I have met who was autistic. Are you sure? And all of these sort of comments, because if we think back to the Dustin Hoffman film, The Rain Man, which we can look at it in two ways. We think, well, did it sort of raise awareness? Well, yes, to an extent, but it certainly put a lot of stereotypes into people's minds that being autistic means that you just look at a mass sheet of numbers and you can just work out formulas quickly, and also you've got no social skills whatsoever. Yeah, absolutely, but it didn't really do much good actually in the grand scheme of things in that way, and it certainly put a lot of stereotypes into people. So thank you, Hollywood, for that one.
Well, Sean, can I give you one anecdote on that? When I became a campaigner, it was an evolution. I loathed that film, and I didn't even know why for about 10 years. I loathed every aspect of it. I loved the acting, and then I realized this is the stereotype. I've met people like was portrayed in that film.
Absolutely.
Very few. It took me years of doing a lot of work with people to realize why. I was going to write an article recently. I know Luke Bearden quite well, which was to actually write an article saying why I hate ... Rain Man. I'm still thinking of writing it after hearing this at the moment, because it's a great piece of art, but it reinforced the stereotype. And the other one is Korean culture. When you talk about culture, a colleague who is worth looking up in this field, a guy called Professor Roy Grinker, he's now retired, a Harvard professor. He wrote a book about the anthropology of what he called autism. And one of the reasons for that is he's got a Korean family, so he's American. And up until about the 1990s, he was an anthropologist. There's no word for autism in Korean, and there was a lot of stereotypes and stigma about it. There's a huge change in Korea by one docudrama movie that was made about a Korean mother with a son who had a neurological difference, and he tracked it to show how Korean society it's not accepting now of people with autism, but it's a massive difference, all down to a debate about one documentary. So we can do a lot with this. But the stereotypes drive me crazy all the time. Really.
Absolutely.
High functioning is another phrase if you ever want to drive people crazy. Oh, you must be high functioning. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Great comments on that. The next question is, how can workplaces and educational institutions better accommodate individuals with dyspraxia and autism? So that's open to the panel.
I don't mind jumping in again, certainly in the workplaces is stop burying your head in the sand, stop being frightened of litigation, stop being frightened that you're going to get sued for anything you do and say, and embrace the strengths of individuals. So to be honest, I have been in some hostile environments. I've been in some very challenging conditions. And as I said, Georgia, I would walk with you any day. I really would, because we need a diverse way of thinking so that we can get the best possible products. So, you know, my advice is get your heads out of the sand, start taking chances if you view it as taking risk, and putting reasonable adjustments in place to help everyone so that you can have equity in the working environment. Stop focusing on how people do things and whether they need to work flexibly or whatever those adjustments are, and start looking at what the product is coming out of the other end. How productive is a team? Don't worry about the process. Be a leader and trust the people that you've got with you.
Thank you, Sean. Anyone else like to say something on that front?
One sentence, Raj. I struggle with schools, but that's because I'm almost permanently at war in my job with education environments who don't make reasonable adjustments. I'm seeing more of it actually in the adult area in employment. I'm seeing some changes. You do have some fantastic schools, I better caveat that, but in general, education is a challenge around individualization in general in this country. And for one of the most developed countries in the world, forget handwriting and writing and literacy. I work in a lot of different jurisdictions, including Scandinavia, and we've got a lot to learn from other cultures about accepting people at school and at early ages with a whole range of developmental conditions. But I think it's improving, and I'd be quite optimistic. And I'd be quite optimistic about the future. I have a young man that I work with who is terrified because he can actually articulate. He isolates himself a lot, and he's been watching the news, and he's been told that, you know, he's going to be forced back into work now. And his exact words to me was, "I want to work, but I don't want to lose my DA." And it was nice to say to him, a green paper is government suggestions, it's not law. And actually, I want to see more people feeling like you, that they can try out different jobs, night work, day work, until we get there. And I think some of our politicians are starting to realise now that neurodiversity is an untapped resource still for the workforce. And that's the future. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's variable across different industries in education in terms of them, you know, sort of adapting to individuals. I was on a different webinar talking about exam invigilation, and they said that the invigilation, they have to get a lot more rooms organised. They went from 10 rooms to 30 rooms for invigilation, and they said that's not enough, and they need to go up to 60 rooms. So that's obviously quite a six-fold increase in adaptation, whether it's affordable or whether it's practical.
I think it's affordable, Raj. If we choose to make it affordable, we stagger our exams. I'm somebody who's done a lot of university invigilating. It's what we do is we see them as barriers, rather than actually saying, well, actually, you know, if you have to stagger an exam, which I know one particular place that he works with, it's about a mindset that's different. And actually, I think the more people who are more open about the workplace, when I say schools, I mean my battles in schools. There are higher education institutions now. I work at one at Birmingham City University, which has this big sign saying they're dyslexia friendly. I gave them a really hard time. They probably are actually compared to a lot of places. I have to give them credit. But the fear of this is more work, the reasonable adjustments in the workplace, I think it's a big question. I'm not a, my attitude is very different, which is my outcome is to produce people who can contribute to society. My challenge is, how do I make that work? And that's why in schools, how we look at quality interaction time rather than quantity is a big challenge for the future as well in education. You know, giving somebody that extra hour is a huge difference to someone. It's not taking that time away from someone else. That's the rationing argument, which we've been conned by our politicians for the last actually 3 decades. Yeah. That it's about financial resourcing. Sorry, Raj, I'll get on my soapbox in a minute and you'll have to block me. Sorry.
Yes. And the other thing is that in those of you in management or in the corporate world, there's not enough training and education around this, which means that you cannot fully support your team. The individual may be, the leader may be autistic in some form, or dyspraxia or ADHD. So that is still a steep learning curve in the world of business and employment. Okay, so we're going to move on. We're coming to the last few minutes of our discussion together. So What is one thing you wish people understood better about dyspraxia and autism? So those with lived experience who want to say anything about that?
So for me, the one thing I wish people would understand better about autism is that whilst I don't always see things the same way, my views can be just as valid. An example of this would be, again, it's from schools from early age, where we were given a booklet to fill in some like drawings, and you had to colour the pencil from top to bottom or bottom to top, and I was the only person to do it the opposite way round from everyone else. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say, to be honest, because
Thank you, Georgia.
yeah.
And anyone else want to say anything at this point on that?
I just wanted to echo what I said earlier, which was that they're both neurodevelopmental disorders. So with my dyspraxia, I struggled with coordination, spatial awareness, but that kind of overlaps with proprioception, which is body awareness, interoception, internal body sense, and vestibular, which is about motion and balance, or movement and balance. So, if you add other things in there like hypermobility, that it's really like a spectrum of overlapping things, labels that if I think a lot of talk around the social model, but not that one disability model should be employed in society, but if things were more towards a social model and there was this baseline of innate value and understanding and acceptance, then we wouldn't necessarily have to struggle so hard to get to these labels to then help explain what I'm trying to explain right now. So hopefully that makes sense, but that's the bit I wanted to add in. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last question is, have you faced any particular struggles with accessing support or accommodations? If so, what changes would you like to see? So anyone from the audience or even or the panel as a last comment? Zilla?
I think the biggest change that I would like to see is that we're still diagnosing people for not being able to cope with inaccessible environments. And I would really like to see a change in that story. And I would really like to see us fixing our environments rather than focusing on just a diagnosis.
Thank you.
Can I add one thing that's I've thought about it because I knew you were going to ask it. I saw the questions, Raj, which is that I'm a diagnostician, but I'm not throwing diagnosis out the water. But if you take children in this country, and there's a point to this, something about 80% of diagnoses are confirmed a year, 18 months, 3 months on, particularly with adolescents. So why does the label needed for that? It's because resources come with it. And this goes right through society. One of the things that my colleagues and I are campaigning for, and we think it's not a dream, but we're putting the argument, unfortunately, to the Department of Education in this country and other countries as well, which is actually, if you know that 80% of the time diagnosis is confirmed, don't make someone wait. Allocate the resources in the first place. And then if you've got a problem at the end of it and say, I'm terribly sorry, but you don't fit any of those labels, then it's a resource-driven approach. It's not actually, believe it or not, as uncost effective. The economists have looked at it. So my plea is we need to rethink drastically how we provide sports. If we go down the diagnostic route with professionals, people are making loads of money shortening waiting lists, and they're not. What they're doing is creating more demand. So I'm with you, Zilla, with it. I think it's actually about changing those reasonable adjustments, and that includes diagnosis as well. So that's mine.
Thank you, Andy.
You shouldn't have sent me the questions, Raj.
So Vijay, I think you got your hand up.
So I just wanted to add in, I couldn't agree more with what everyone's saying, but I think interpersonal attitudes really need to change along with cross-cultural education. Those two things, like along with the accessibility and the reasonable adjustments and all the tech, everything, I think those two things, which are more kind of interpersonal skills or social areas of change, I think they're very important. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm just going to call this to the end of our discussion today. I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer. I just want to say a massive thank you to our audience for attending today, as well as our panel. So thank you to Fazila, Vijay, Georgia, Sean, and Andy. So it's been a real pleasure to host this evening. This will be recorded, and we'll be able to share this on YouTube, and to those who attended today and those who missed it as well. So thank you once again, and there will be other topics we'll be discussing over the next 6 months or so. So keep in touch with this group. Take care and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raj.
Thanks, Raj.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.